The judge laid down the law, demanding respect in her courtroom. But this billionaire jerk, full of himself, just laughs and yells, like, "I'm too good for rules." It kicked off one heck of a showdown, leaving everyone there speechless. Stick around to see how it all went sideways. Oh, and shout out in the comments where you're watching from. The place was buzzing, like a live wire was running through it. Back in the cheap seats, the press was all huddled together, cameras flashing every which way. You could see the big shot execs whispering, trying to play cool, but their fancy suits couldn't hide how freaked out they were. And a few senators were sitting up straight, looking around like they were cornered. Right in the thick of it was Daniel Royce, who used to think he was untouchable. He's the head honcho of Royce Pharmaceuticals, made his fortune on meds, but not by helping people, more like controlling who gets to live or die. He gobbled up the whole industry, jacking up prices so high nobody could afford them, while he filled his own pockets with dirty money. You'd think he'd be sweating bullets, but nope. He's just lounging there, legs crossed, those fancy cufflinks of his flashing in the light. If you didn't know any better, you'd think he was in a board meeting, not facing a room full of people who wanted to see him taken down. And then you've got Judge Naomi Sinclair. That woman has stared down crooked politicians, took on billion-dollar companies, and never even flinched when they tried to strong-arm her. She pushed her glasses up, looked around the room like she already knew justice was going to be served. "Mr. Royce," she says, her voice steady but firm, "this is a court of law. You will show some respect." Royce hardly even glanced at her, just turned to his lawyer, mumbled something, and finally looks at the judge. With a cocky little smirk, he leans in and says, "Respect? Lady, I don't answer to you. I'm above the law." You could hear gasps all over the place. The whole courtroom just went silent. Even his own lawyers looked shocked. Those senators in the back went white as a sheet. But Naomi? She didn't move a muscle, just tilted her head a little, like she was studying him under a microscope. Then, cool as you please, she says, "Then let's just see about that, Mr. Royce." Those words hung there like a bomb about to go off. That was the moment the trial of the century really started. When Naomi Sinclair said those words, the whole vibe in the courtroom changed. It wasn't fear or anger, but the slow realization that Daniel Royce had just signed his own death warrant. His big head had gotten him far, but today it just made him look like a fool. Naomi took her time, flipping through the case file like she didn't have a guy sitting right there who thought he owned the place. The silence stretched on and on until she finally looked up. "Prosecution, you may proceed." And some tall guy in a blue suit stood up and straightened his tie. His name was Ethan W. Then steps up Ethan Wells, the top dog prosecutor known for tearing apart those white-collar criminals. He walks right to the front. Every move he makes is sharp and on purpose. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he starts, his voice clear as a bell. "What you're about to hear isn't just some simple case of fraud. It ain't just about being greedy." He looks around the room, stops for a second on Royce, who still has that stupid smirk on his face. "No, this is a matter of life and death," Wells keeps going. "Because of Daniel Royce, because his company has too much power, people have died." Naomi watches the jury, and you could see they weren't just listening, they were feeling it now. "This ain't just a guess, folks," Wells says. "We have the proof, hundreds of emails, financial records, and folks who are going to testify that'll show you the real ugly truth about Royce Pharmaceuticals." That got Royce's attention. He finally turns his head. He still has that smirk, but you could see his eyes flicker. "We're going to show you how Mr. Royce himself signed off on jacking up the prices on medicine that people need to live, how he bribed government officials, and how he shut down anyone who tried to rat him out." He pauses like he's planning it out, and most importantly, Wells says, his voice low and serious, "We're going to show you how real people suffered because of his greed, how families, parents, kids, husbands, wives lost their lives just because they couldn't afford medicine that used to be easy to get." The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop, except for Royce, who let out a little chuckle. It wasn't loud, but it was loud enough for Naomi to hear, loud enough for the jury to hear, and loud enough for the whole room to hate him even more. Wells turns to him, giving him a look that could cut you. "You think that's funny, Mr. Royce?" The billionaire just leans back, smirking like he doesn't have a care in the world. I think you're putting on a good show. You could hear people whispering. Even the judge's helpers were looking at each other. Wells wasn't going to take the bait. Instead, he takes a step closer. "Tell me, Mr. Royce," he says, his voice calm, but with a hint of something mean. "Do you think it's funny when a 7-year-old is gasping for air because his mom can't afford an inhaler?" Royce didn't stop smirking. "What about an old man collapsing in the parking lot of the pharmacy because his heart medicine costs 3 times what he can pay?" Still, Royce didn't even flinch. Wells takes another step. "What about a mother holding her kid in a hospital bed, knowing that the medicine that could save him is right there on the shelf, but she can't get it because of you?" This time, Royce's jaw tightens up. For the first time since this whole thing started, you could see something in his eyes, like he was annoyed. Wells didn't let up. "Tell me, Mr. Royce, what part do you think is so funny?" Silence. Royce looks over at his lawyer for a split second too long. Naomi saw it. The jury saw it. Everyone saw it. For the first time, the big shot cracked. "Objection," Royce's lawyer finally mumbles, standing up. "The prosecution is trying to." "Sustained," Naomi says smoothly. Then, turning her head just a little bit toward Royce, she adds, "But I like an answer to the question myself." The jury was all ears. The audience wasn't even breathing. And for the first time, Daniel Royce didn't have a snappy comeback. The courtroom was quiet, but you could feel the tension, thick enough to choke on. Daniel Royce just felt the first crack in his armor. He wasn't freaking out yet, but his jaw was clenched tight. You could see his grip on the table was different. Judge Naomi Sinclair noticed every little thing. "Prosecution," she says, her voice calm, cool, and not budging an inch. "Call your first witness." Ethan Wells didn't even hesitate. The prosecution calls Maya Thompson to the stand. You could hear some people whispering. Everyone knew that name. She was the mother who lost her son, the woman who had been fighting Royce Pharmaceuticals by herself for years. And now she was here. The doors swing open and Maya walks in. She wasn't dressed to impress anyone. She wasn't some fancy lawyer with rehearsed lines. She was just a mom who was hurting. Her hair was pool back in a ponytail. She had on a faded blouse and some pants that had seen better days. She didn't have the money or power, but the minute she stepped in, she had the whole room in the palm of her hand. Even Royce was looking at her now. She sat down, holding her hands tight. She was breathing steady, but you could see something in her eyes, something real, something that couldn't be broken. Wells walks up to her. "Ms. Thompson," he says, his voice softer now. "Could you tell the court why you're here today?" She swallows hard, and then, in a voice that was steady but full of pain, she starts. "I had a son," she says, then pauses. The jury leaned in closer. His name was Nathan. Royce blinked just a little, but Naomi saw it. He was 8 years old. Maya keeps going, her voice not shaking. He had epilepsy. His seizures were under control. At first, her hands clenched together. Then, the medicine he needed went from $40 to $600, just like that. You could hear people murmuring. "I worked 2 jobs, Maya says. I begged for help. I called every number on that prescription bottle. I got passed around from one person to another, put on hold, ignored, brushed off." She turns her head and looks right at Royce. "I called your company," she says, her voice carrying more weight than 1,000 headlines. "I begged them to think about it. I told them I couldn't afford it." The jury was holding its breath. They laughed at me. Even the person writing everything down hesitated for a second. Naomi didn't show anything on her face, but she tapped her fingers against the bench, slow and steady. Royce wasn't smirking anymore. "They told me," Maya goes on, her voice quieter now, "that if I couldn't pay, I should look for other options." She lets those words hang in the air. "Do you know what other options meant for me?" she asks, and there's silence. "It meant giving him less pills," she whispers. "It meant trying to make what should have lasted a month last for 3. Royce shifted in his seat until one night, Maya says, her eyes wet but angry. "He had a seizure, a bad one, and I didn't have the meds to stop it." A pause. Nobody moved. "I held him," Maya whispers. "I held him while he shook, while he was struggling to breathe. I told him it was going to be okay. Her voice broke just a little, then it wasn't. A tear slid down her cheek. The jury, grown men, older women, professionals, people who had seen some tough stuff, looked like they were falling apart. Even Royce's lawyers looked shaken. Maya pulls something from her pocket, a tiny, empty pill bottle. She holds it up. This, she says, her voice stronger now, is what was left of Nathan's medicine. This bottle cost $40 before Daniel Royce decided it wasn't making enough money. She turned it a little so the court could see the label. This bottle, she keeps going, should have lasted for another refill. She looks right at Royce again. But you killed him before he could even use it. The silence was crazy loud. Naomi felt it, the change, the moment when everyone in that room knew this trial was already over. Royce, for the first time, looked like he was uncomfortable. He reached for his jacket cuffs, adjusted them, a nervous tick. Wells nods. No more questions, Your Honor. Naomi turns to Royce's lawyer. Cross-examination. Pause, a long one. Royce's lawyer hesitates. He looks at his client, then at Maya, then back again. Then quiet as can be, he says, "No questions, Your Honor." Another wave of whispers goes through the courtroom. Naomi gives a little nod. "M.S. Thompson," she says, her voice steady, "you may step down." Maya takes a breath. Slowly, she puts the pill bottle back in her pocket, stands up, and walks off the stand. As she walks past Royce's table, she doesn't even look at him. Because now, she said everything she needed to say. Maya Thompson's story wasn't just heard. It was felt by the jury, by the courtroom, by the whole world. And Daniel Royce knew it. He could feel it in the way the jurors wouldn't even look at him. He could see it in the quiet satisfaction on Ethan Wells's face. He could even hear it in the angry whispers from his own lawyers. Maya's words just hung there in the air. But Royce? He's not the kind of guy to just sit there quiet. He starts tapping his fingers on the table. You could see his jaw twitch, like he was getting mad. He rolls his shoulders back, breathes out real slow, then leans into his main lawyer. "Do something," he mutters, his voice low, sharp. But his lawyer doesn't move, doesn't even look at him. For the first time ever, Daniel Royce was getting ignored. His anger started to boil over. Naomi Sinclair turns to the prosecution. "Mr. Wells," she says, smooth as silk, "call your next witness." Ethan Wells doesn't move right away. Instead, he takes a step forward, adjusts his cufflinks as he looks at Royce. And then he smiles. It wasn't a smirk, it wasn't him bragging. It was the smile of a man who knew his opponent had already lost. The prosecution calls Dr. Anthony Hayes to the stand. A middle-aged man in a gray suit walks in, walking steady as a rock. If Maya Thompson was the emotional gut punch, Dr. Hayes was the cold, hard facts hitting you like a ton of bricks. He walks up to the stand, adjusts his glasses, clears his throat, and puts his hands together, nice and neat. Wells walks up to him. "Dr. Hayes, could you tell the court what you do for a living?" "I'm the chief medical officer at St. John's General Hospital," he says. "And how long have you been working in the medical field?" 26 years. "Have you treated patients who were hurt by the price changes that Royce Pharmaceuticals made?" You could see the jury paying attention now. Dr. Hayes takes a slow breath. "Yes," he says, "hundreds of them." The room gets quiet. In fact, Hayes keeps going, looking right at Royce. There was something people started saying a lot in our emergency rooms the last few years. Wells tilted his head a little. "And what was that, doctor?" He pauses for a second. "Did you check to see if Royce raised the price again?" Another wave of whispers goes through the courtroom. Naomi saw Royce clench his lips together. She knew what was coming. Everyone did. But Royce? Royce couldn't help himself. The anger that had been building and building finally exploded. He scoffs, louder than he should have. And that's when Naomi turns her head. "Mr. Royce," she says, her voice calm as can be. "Is there something you'd like to say?" That should have been the time for him to shut his mouth. But being too full of himself never helps you know when to be quiet. And so Daniel Royce did exactly what Naomi expected him to do. He laughs, loud, like he's making fun of everyone. And then, still chuckling, he leans forward, putting his elbows on the table. Your Honor, he says, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Are we really going to pretend this is some sob story about poor people and their bad luck? You could hear people gasp. Even his own lawyers sat up straight. Ethan Wells didn't even flinch. But Naomi? Naomi just leans back in her chair. Continue, Mr. Royce, she says, putting her hands together. I'm sure the jury's real interested in what you have to say. Royce didn't hear the warning in her voice. He was too far gone now, too angry, too out in the open. Look, he says, turning a little in his chair, like he's explaining something simple to kids. I run a business. Medicine ain't charity. It's not my fault people don't make enough to pay for the best care. A woman in the front row puts her hand over her mouth. You want me to say sorry because I run a successful company. Royce goes on, because I know how the free market works. And then he shrugs his shoulders in a way that would be shown on TV for the next 20 years, he says. If they can't afford it, that's not my problem. The courtroom blew up, a roar of anger, angry whispers all around. You could hear the reporters writing like crazy. Even the jury, who had been neutral and fair, looked disgusted. Naomi waited for Royce to realize what he had just done. And then, once the noise died down, she did the one thing that would make it even worse for him. She turned her head, ever so, slightly, towards the jury. And in the calmest, easiest voice, she asks, Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, do any of you have any questions for Mr. Royce? Silence. Then, one by one, hands start going up. Royce's face turns white as a ghost. His lawyer tries to stand, tries to say something, tries to fix the mess. But Naomi holds up her hand. Sit down, counselor, she says, smooth as can be. Your client seems to be doing just fine answering for himself. The first juror, a middle-aged woman with a pin on her blazer that says healthcare workers for reform, lowers her hand. Mr. Royce, she says, her voice steady, do you think my daughter, who died because she couldn't afford her insulin, deserved it? Another crack in Royce's armor. Another juror, an older man in a military uniform, lowers his hand next. Mr. Royce, he says, how much money is a life worth to you? Another, Mr. Royce, a younger man whispers, his voice shaking. What would you have done if Nathan was your son? Royce's eyes dart to his lawyer. His face is blank, and you could see the panic setting in. And Naomi just smiles, because this wasn't cross-examination. This was something way worse. This was Daniel Royce drowning, and no one was coming to save him. The courtroom had turned on him. The jury had spoken, not with a verdict, but with their disgust. The public had spoken, with social media blowing up with anger, and news headlines updating every second. And then came the final, most crushing blow. Naomi Sinclair shifted in her chair. Prosecution, she said, you may continue. Ethan Wells nods, stepping forward again. He adjusts his suit, cool and careful. Your Honor, he says, turning towards the screen at the front of the courtroom. The prosecution submits Exhibit 42, live footage from today's Senate press conference. A press conference? Royce frowned. His lawyer looked just as confused. But Naomi already knew. Click. The screen lit up. And then, the voice that made Royce's blood run cold. I had no idea about Mr. Royce's business dealings, says Senator Mark Caldwell, one of Royce's biggest supporters for years. I am shocked and disgusted by what's come out today. The courtroom exploded. Flashes of camera lights, stifled gasps, Royce's hands clench into fists. Another voice, Senator Rachel Whitmore. If Mr. Royce is found guilty, I fully support giving him the maximum sentence. And then came the final dagger. We, as a nation, can't let greed be more important than human lives. His allies, his friends, the same people he had paid off, protected, and bribed for years, were ditching him. His empire was burning down right in front of him. A notification flashed on one of the courtroom's TV screens. Breaking news, Royce Pharmaceutical stock plummets 72% in 30 minutes. The oxygen in Royce's lungs vanished. He turns to his lawyer, his voice sharp, frantic, do something. But his lawyer was already packing up his briefcase. That was when reality hit him. He was done. No power, no money, no way out. And Naomi Sinclair, she let him sit in that mom and tea. Let him feel like the walls were closing in on him. Let it all hit him at once, like a tidal wave crashing down. Then she sits up straight. "Jury," she says, "have you reached a verdict?" The jury foreman stood up, his voice not shaking at all. "We find the defendant guilty on all counts." It was over. Royce stood up quick. "No, this is a joke. I'm too rich for this. I'm above the law." Naomi looks him right in the eye. And then, in the calmest but deadliest voice, she says, "You thought money was the same as power. But today, you learned the truth. You can buy off politicians, but you can't buy justice. You can control markets, but you can't control this court. And you can take lives, but you can't run away from what's coming for you." Then, without breaking eye contact, she slams the gavel down. "Daniel Royce, you are hereby sentenced to life in federal prison. It's effective right now." Royce lost it. He lunged at his lawyer, grabbing his suit. "Fix this." His lawyer pulled away. "Not anymore." Then you hear the handcuffs clicking shut. Royce was fighting and screaming, desperate. "I built this country. I own all of you. You can't do this to me." The cameras flashed, the headlines went out. And as Royce was dragged out of the courtroom, screaming his head off, Naomi Sinclair watched him, without even a flicker of emotion. Because, in the end, the only thing Daniel Royce really owned was his downfall. Maya Thompson sat there, holding that empty pill bottle in her hands. She didn't say anything, didn't move. Then, she finally took a breath. It wasn't relief, it wasn't happiness, but it was justice. Judge Naomi Sinclair stepped down from the bench, walking towards her. She reached out and took Maya's hand. "Tonight," she says softly, "Nathan got his justice." Maya swallowed hard and nodded. And for the first time in 8 years, she let the tears fall. Daniel Royce thought money was everything. He thought he could buy anything with it. Laws, politicians, even silence. For years, he lived thinking he was untouchable, that the system would always protect him. But being arrogant comes with a price. In the end, it wasn't just the courtroom that got him. It was his own words, his own greed, his own belief that he could get away with anything forever. He forgot the most important thing. Power isn't measured by how much money you have. It's measured by being held responsible. Because no matter how high you climb, no matter how much you own, when justice comes knocking, even the biggest shots have to fall. How often does the system protect the rich while regular folks get screwed? And more importantly, will justice ever catch up with the ones who hide behind their power? What do you think? Drop your thoughts in the comments down below. Let's talk about it. If this story made you think, hit that like button, share it with others, and don't forget to subscribe for more hard-hitting stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and remember, nobody is above the law.